wonderful, wonderful program. And a lot of that, they have to introduce themselves. Okay. Dr. Melvold.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. I'm Doug Melvold, and also our presenters today, we have two others, Jack Willey and Helen Rockrohr. So we'll be presenting our program. I want to say this is kind of a hard act to follow after those of you who saw the Henry Wallace program, one-person play 2 weeks ago, and then I thought I would hate to follow that one, but last week I have to say Bonnie's program on the Sweigerts was wonderful. Of course, with the Sweigerts being the founding family of the Jackson Sentinel, have some interest. I thought I knew had a little bit of knowledge of history, but learned quite a bit last week. So we're going to talk about this year, go back a few years, 61 years to be exact, to the year 1963. John F. Kennedy was in the White House. The median family income that year was around $6,200. The United States, we were still in the middle of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. But we did manage that year to establish a telephone hotline between Washington and Moscow. Beatlemania was starting to cross the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. Touch-tone phones, the 5-digit zip code, and audio cassette tapes were introduced that year. The final Mercury space mission took place with astronaut Gordon Cooper orbiting the Earth 22 times. In Iowa, Harold Hughes was governor. The issue that consumed the state that summer was the legalization of liquor by the drink in public bars. In Maquoketa, Larry Schulte was the mayor. I thought probably it would have been Ben Jacobson. Looked it up, and actually Larry was. Maybe Ben probably preceded him and maybe even came after him for a few terms. Red Hinton was a rising star on the World Horseshoe pitching stage, and a brand new high school complex was in the final stages of construction, and it would open that fall. The only black person that I can recall living in Maquoketa that year was Solomon Selassie, the AFS high school exchange student who spent the year here, and he was from Ethiopia. So from that world, 4 years ago, 61 years ago, 4 teenagers from Maquoketa and their church minister took off on an adventure through 9 states into the deep south. And as the trip summary that we received later stated, to learn the truth about the problems and the attempted solutions of the South. I think this is the first trip to that part of the country for any of us. So, this is a photo of Reverend Adams, J. Chandler Adams. Some of you may remember him, who was the years that he was pastor of the United Church of Christ. He left here in 1970, had a pastorate in Michigan, then later retired, built a home in Tennessee, and passed away, I'm not sure what number of years ago. And I don't know if we recognize any of these people here. These are the 4 of us who went. Jack, Connie Suthers Patridge is here with her husband Don, and maybe we'll hopefully hear some of Connie's, any of her impressions afterwards. So the 4 of us, we were members of the then the United Church of Christ, the youth group from 61 years ago, who were on that trip. Then Helen, if you want to talk a little bit about the situation going on that time.
Doug, who were your chaperones on that trip?
Our chaperones would be Reverend Adams, and I'll talk a little more about this. There were some church leaders with some of the other people we joined.
Thank you.
This is the book, Black Like Me, that we were supposed to read before we went on this trip. The author also gave a speech in Davenport that we all heard him speak as well. This is...
You need to talk more.
Okay. Yeah,
Keep
okay.
it down. Pull it down. Keep it down.
Okay.
There.
In 1959, John Howard Griffin, the author of this book, spent 6 weeks traveling through the Deep South as a black man. This was a time when everything was greatly segregated, and he was from Texas, but he wanted to know what the climate was as a black man down there rather than as a white man. So in late 1959, he went to a friend's house in New Orleans, Louisiana. Once there, under the care of a dermatologist, he underwent a regime of large oral doses of the anti-vitiligo drug and spent up to 15 hours daily under an ultraviolet light for about a week. He was given regular blood tests to see if his liver was still okay. The darkening of his skin was not perfect, so he used some stain to help with that. He shaved his head bald because he had straight hair, so he had to hide that. He would not look like a black man. And satisfied that he could pass as an African American, Griffin headed to the Deep South. He did end his journey in late November in Montgomery, Alabama, and then he spent 3 days secluded from sunlight in a hotel room and stopped taking his skin darkening meds. There have been rumors that he died later from the drugs he'd taken. He died of diabetes 7 years later. I'm going to read a little bit about how he came about this. October 28, 1959. For years, the idea had haunted me, and that night it returned more incessantly than ever. If a white man became a Negro in the Deep South, what adjustments would he have to make? What is it like to experience discrimination based on skin color, something that no one has any control over? This speculation was sparked again by a report that lay on my desk in the old barn that served as my office. The report mentioned the rise in suicide tendency among Southern Negroes. This did not mean that they killed themselves, but rather that they had reached a stage where they simply no longer cared whether they lived or died. It was that bad then, despite the white Southerners' legislation, who insisted that they had a wonderfully harmonious relationship with Negroes. I lingered in my office at my parents' in Mansfield, Texas. I just could not sleep. How else, except by coming a Negro, could a white man hope to learn the truth? Though we lived side by side throughout the South, communication between the two races had simply ceased to exist. Neither really knew what went on in the lives of the other race. The Southern Negro will not tell the white man the truth. He long ago learned that if he speaks the truth unpleasing to the white man will make life miserable for him. The only way I could see to bridge the gap between us was to become a Negro, and I decided I would do this. I was prepared to walk into a life that apparently, suddenly mysterious and frightening. With my decision to become a Negro, I realized that I, a specialist in race issues, really knew nothing of the Negro's real problem. I was going to mention also, I had found that this book is now banned because it describes racial tension, but I cannot verify that. The other books on the banned book list were Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Diary of Anne Frank, The Scarlet Letter, etc. But as I said, I can't verify that. Maybe that wasn't true. Okay, here's a calendar. I'm going to talk about, first of all, this is when we left Maquoketa to meet up with our group in Hinsdale, Illinois. These three events, major historical events, happened right before we left, within a day or two or a week or two. And in some cases, we were just a few miles away from some of these things. So I'm going to start with the Woolworth sit-in. So this was done actually the end of May, 2 weeks before our trip. It was the most violent sit-in of the 1960s. These students were from Tougaloo College, where we were going to be staying in their dorms several weeks later. The students were spat upon, poured syrup on, they were cut glass, they were cut with glass. This was a 2-hour sit-in, and it was, it included the president of Tougaloo College, Tougaloo students, the chaplain of the college. It started out with 2 or 3 students, both black and white, and then they were joined by 5 others. And this went on for 2 hours. It was only stopped when the owner of the Woolworth store called the police. You know, they were on the side, you know, of the white people. They called the police finally when they started throwing cans of food and that kind of stuff because it was damaging his inventory. And these are the police dogs. I don't know if this was in this particular sit-in, but this was used quite a bit throughout the South. Then 2 weeks after that event, John F. Kennedy gave his civil rights speech, and it was a call to action just to treat each other respectfully, and he said he was going to be sending a bill to Congress to get things straightened out. And then this happened the day after JFK's civil rights speech, the day before we left Maquoketa. And this was the assassination of Medgar Evers, who was the first NAACP officer for in Mississippi. Now, he was connected to Tougaloo College and encouraged the kids to have a nonviolent sit-in. I might also say that his home was within 10 miles, out of his home, but Jackson, Mississippi was within 10 miles of where we were going to be staying 8 days later.
So it was into this situation and these events that the 4 of us and Reverend Adams, I guess you could say, were plunged in a tour. This was it was a bus tour. I should mention I was 16. The three of us were 15 and 16 years old. I was 16, and this was the summer between, for Jack, Connie, and I, the summer between our sophomore and junior years in high school. Helen had graduated.
I just graduated from high school, and the Woolworth sit-in was the day of our graduation. So I didn't listen to the news. I didn't know what was going on.
And we joined, the 5 of us from Maquoketa joined a church group, a youth group, from a church, Union Church in Hinsdale, Illinois. And the trip had come about through our family's connection with the family of the Reverend Bruce and Joe Dean, who were had resided in Maquoketa during the 1950s when Bruce was the pastor of what was then the First Congregational Church in Maquoketa. I don't know if any of you remember the family. the Deans had their children. They had 5 children, and their children were close in age to the Melvold kids. So our families formed a friendship that lasted after the Deans left Maquoketa in about 1957 or 58, moved to suburban Chicago, and eventually Bruce then was one of 2 or 3 pastors of a large church called Union Church in Hinsdale. And so we had stayed in touch with the Deans, and sometime in early 1963, Susan Dean, their older daughter, had gotten in touch with me saying that the youth group of this church was planning a bus tour through the Deep South to visit several colleges and missions that the United Church of Christ, which was merging with the ENR, Evangelical and Reformed Church, and the Congregational Church, anyway, that these church-related institutions, and to learn about, of course, some of the racial problems in the South. And Susan said that there were some vacancies still available, and would anybody from the Maquoketa church youth group be interested? So I brought that up at our next youth group meeting, and as a result, Helen, Jack, Connie, and I, and even Reverend Adams went. He had a special interest in going, as he had born and grew up in a rural part of Alabama. He had, I know of one brother who still who still lived in the South, and they did not see eye to eye on racial matters, although we did visit the home, and he, as I recall, was still on speaking terms with his brother, fortunately. And so I remember making that stop. So that's how the trip came about. There were about 24, 25 youth on the trip in all. There were some couple, 2 or 3 adult chaperones. We chartered a bus, and we took off. We left, the 5 of us drove from Maquoketa to Hinsdale, stayed all night. The next morning, we had an orientation at the church, and boarded the bus and took off south. So during this 10-11 trip, we visited 7 colleges and 5 missions that were social service organizations or missions that were working, were church-related, doing work, and that's what we visited. This was not a trip to be to join marches, civil rights marches, and so on, but more of kind of to learn about what the church was doing, particularly in relation to the racial situation that was coming up. Jack will talk a little bit about some of the places we visited. I will say that in preparing for this program, in visiting with each other, that none of us really remember. We have a few impressions, moments of recollection, but a lot of it are just different things that happened. We don't really remember a lot of things that we were told. We would stop at a college. We'd be staying in the college dorm, and we would meet with a dean or one of the college officials who would talk about what the racial situation was there, what the college was doing, and so on. But fortunately, I had saved the booklet that we had all had gotten for I don't know how this was saved, or my mother had never thrown it out, that gives background on the trip and talks about the trip, and even afterward, one of the girls who was on the trip, her job was to keep a log, and then she wrote a summary, a travel log or a summary of the trip, of our impressions later. But I think that our impressions are of how sheltered, how this group that had grown up in Maquoketa, Iowa, and suddenly making this trip. I'd been able to do some traveling before this, but it had never been my first trip through through the Deep South. The map here, and thank you Helen and Richard for doing this. You can kind of follow the arrows. We went from Maquoketa to Hinsdale, from there to, we visited Fisk University at Nashville. We traveled into Georgia, visited the place that we will probably remember the most was a place called Koinonia Farm in Americus, Georgia, and then down into Alabama, eventually Louisiana. We were in New Orleans, the first time to see New Orleans. Came back up through Jackson, Mississippi, where the Woolworths sit-in had occurred just a couple weeks before, and where Medgar Evers was assassinated. Made a stop at down in the boot heel of Missouri at a mission there, St. Louis at another mission, and then back home. And so Jack will talk a little bit about some of the places that we visited.
I will have to say it was quite an experience, you know, in Maquoketa and Jackson County. We didn't see a whole lot of black people. And so it was eye-opening, and as Helen said, we all had to read Black Like Me, and it really did open our eyes as to what a black person was living under. You know, it was quite an experience reading that book, and I kind of think it's too bad it's banned. But
If it is.
if it is, Helen thinks it is. Our first stop, as Doug indicated, was at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. Dean Jones, the dean of the college and chapel, was our guide. Fisk is a college established in 1866. Was founded for the education of the freed slaves by Clinton B. Fisk, who was the chairman of the Freedmen's Bureau in 1865. Fisk was among the first group of predominantly Negro institutions to this full membership in the Southern Association of Colleges and Secondary Schools. For Fisk, part of the intelligent John Lewis heads a nonviolence committee. After several practice workshops and training, this group goes into Nashville. When asked what they gained, Dean Jones said that there is something about the human being that mean we relish a point. He will not abuse a man who won't fight back. Just after one night in the South, Black Like Me is truly coming to life. Our next stop was at Pleasant Hills, a community center. The center is made up of the May Carver Wharton Nursing and Retirement Home, a retirement village, the Cumberland Fernal and Van Dyke Hospitals, and the Uplands Chamberlain Medical Center of Crossville. This community gives board and medical help to elderly people from all over the country. However, 50% of the patients do come from the surrounding counties. We have come to believe and to find that work with our church is doing to help find a solution to today's problems. Although the center is not directly related to the congregational churches, it does receive their help. Our next stop was in Tallahassee College, or Tigolo College. Tigolo College became the second Negro college given a class, a rating by the Southern Association of Colleges and the Secondary Schools, from the Baptist Boys School to a liberal arts college. A building called Swayway Hall was built for the school for Baptist boys shortly after the Civil War. one of the outstanding things about this college is its library. It had this was back in 1963, they had 42,000 books for the students and 10,000 for the community. They could come in and actually use the library as well. I think more than the college, the people affected us the most. At the First United Church of Christ in Tallahassee, Alabama, the people were so sweet and so nice that it made us really stop and think how unrealistic racial prejudices were. As we pulled away from Tallahassee, each of us was awakened and began to realize just how unfair the conditions in the South were. The next one was the Southern University at College, located in Alabama. It's a 2-year liberal arts college. The location is in an area where the average family income in 1963 was between $1,200 and $1,500 per year. There is an extreme from air-conditioned homes to painted shacks. The Southern Union is attempting to provide at least a 2-year college education for students not able to afford much. The total cost for them to go to the school was $850 approximately a year. Next, we went to Tuskegee Institute. It was founded by Booker T. Washington in 1881 with the help of Lewis Adams and George W. Campbell. It was a real pleasure to visit. Rather than just talking about the history of the school, we went with this time talked about present-day problems and the school's aims. Although Tuskegee used to be a purely technical school, liberal arts and sciences had been added. The most rewarding experience at Tuskegee, however, had nothing to do with the actual programs or the tour. It was during lunch that each of us was given the opportunity to eat and talk to the students, relatively our own age, and find out just how they felt as Negroes in the South. It was truly educational to have this first individual-to-individual exchange. And as Doug talked about, one of our favorite stops was the Koinonia Farms. Anyone some answer to our question on a Christian responsibility today? These quiet community located near Americus, Georgia, was named after a Greek word from the New Testament that means a group of people who live together. It is a non-violent community of 19 who are trying to lay the groundwork to unite all races as brothers. The highlight of the evening came when a group of Negroes from the Nonviolence Workshop came to talk with us. After talking to the kids about the workshop and one of their attempted sit-ins, we all stood in a circle and we sang, "We will overcome." It was a wonderful experience and the Negroes were extremely talented. Next was Back Bay Mission. Our next stop is a completely different atmosphere and yet still very Christian, located in the poor district of Biloxi, Mississippi. It is a community center for the people in that area. It was founded between 1920 and 1923 and was opened as a clinic for the area. As for educational facilities, they have day camp, summer camp, kindergarten classes, nursery schools, a summer service team to give young men a summer job, and also to help keep up the neighborhood. The unique thing about this experience is that it was our second connection with another Southern problem, this being the poor white. Next was Dillard University. Having an understanding to both sides of the story, we met some of the most intelligent people in our next two stops. A private institute, Dillard University, is a co-educational Negro university supported by the Congregational Christian Church and the Board of Education of the Methodist Church. There are opportunities in church camps, a program called Crossroads Africa, or the Peace Corps. When mentioning the problems at the time, it was discovered that although voter registration was very strict, the students are taken it upon themselves to go door to door, teaching people the necessary information they need to pass the test to be a registered voter. Tugela University. Tugela University is a four-year liberal arts college supported by the American Missionary Society, primarily the Congregational Church. Approximately 100 students graduate per year, with 60% of those staying in that teaching in that particular area. Interfaith, international, and interracial in faculty, staff, and students. In a state like Mississippi, and especially Jackson, Tugela is truly an oasis of freedom. To end the evening, we had a social hour with 52 high school students attending a 6-week science program. Again, we felt welcome because the freedom songs we learned at Koinonia were again sung, and this time we felt all more a part of them. Here we were, Illinois kids singing freedom songs, Illinois and Iowa kids singing Illinois freedom songs to students we had read about in the newspaper. It was quite an experience for all of us. Next was the College of Lamoni College, located in Memphis, Tennessee, which is one of the 6 American Missionary Association colleges. It was founded in 1870 as a private institute for the purpose of liberal arts education. And the unusual feature of this college is that all of its 510 students commuted to college because there were no dormitories. However, they did have 4 fraternities and 4 sororities, just like today, sororities and fraternities. Next was Delmo County Community Center. Toward the end of our trip, we began to see the other problems of the South, economics and changing life. And it is related to all of these problems. After generations of dependence upon help was needed to learn independent, so that Delmo Housing Corporation was created to help achieve a higher economic education and social level. In the beginning, the corporation was founded to finance homes ownerships to displaced sharecroppers. I think one of the most worthwhile things the centers are doing with the University of Missouri is promoting adult education classes. Most of the adults in the Boot Heel area have had no more than 5 years of school. So Delmo is helping them return to education. Our last stop was a slum area in St. Louis, Missouri, located in a total area of 1.5 square miles. There is 1/2 square mile of industry, 1 square mile of residential housing, 50,000 people, and 3 community centers supported by the United Church of Christ, so to help bring meaning into their meaningless lives. No Negro is allowed to live south of the border. When mentioning the problems of the time, it was discovered that although voter registration was very strict, the students are taking it. Next was the conclusion. After 10 long but unique days, the caravan comes to an end. In the last few hours of travel, we discussed our experiences on the trip. The 2 most significant stops of the caravan were Connie Farms and Tougaloo, because we felt we were welcomed there more than other places and so much a part of the problem. We felt as if we could really help to welcome and so much part. We discovered that material things aren't the only things that we need. We needed to be human. We were shocked by the results of prejudice. So as we returned to our homes in Maquoketa, Iowa, Western Springs, Rockford, and Hinsdale, Illinois, we give God thanks for who we are and for the chance of learning these dynamic situations. At such a young age, we had no idea what was going on in the world. We were so protected by our environment. Thank you.
I did a little checking online of the colleges, the 7 colleges and the 5 church missions we visited, and found that actually all of them still exist and are still working. Of course, they've adapted to the different social needs of the time and so on. One of the schools, I think Lemoyne, had merged with another small college in the same town, and I found that Southern Union College, a year or 2 after we were there, that was a 2-year college in Alabama, private church-related school. Later was the college was deeded over to the state of Alabama, and it's now very much a part of Alabama's 2-year community college system. But all of these the places that we visited, though without any doubt they have changed and their mission is adapted to the times, still exist. When Helen approached me or brought this this topic up at after a brown bag lunch, we were just visiting maybe a year ago, and asked if I remembered any of this trip. I don't think this is something that we had given much thought to, and I says, my goodness, I haven't thought about this trip in years. I think I might still have the booklet that we were given. I did some digging, and with Mary's help, I did find it, and then when Bonnie found out, learned about this, she says, well, this has got to be a brown bag lunch topic for sure. So I think this experience has really helped jog our memories, and you kind of think about it, or I think all of us have in the 3 or 4 times that we have met, trying to pull this together, and as to what did the trip mean, or what does it mean as 4 very sheltered kids from a town that pretty much white, and while all these things were taking place, I can't say I have to say it wasn't until Helen was doing the research into the actual events, the murder of Medgar Evers, the Woolworth sit-in. I knew about them. I had no idea that they had taken place a couple weeks before until we started preparing for this program. Later in life, Reverend Adams wrote a memoir of some of his life, gave a copy to my folks, which was passed to me, and he does have, I had to look up here, he talks about his years in Coconut, and he does have a mention of the trip. So, and I thought from his perspective it would be kind of interesting. He said, mentions of one summer we conducted a youth mission, one summer we conducted a youth tour to Washington, D.C. and the United Nations in New York. And I think that was in 1964, the year following this. I think Jack was on that trip. Another summer we went south to visit the health and educational institutions related to the United Church. The places included the Uplands Health Center and Retirement Center of Pleasant Hill, Tennessee, Fisk University and Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Des Moines College in Memphis, Talladega and Southern Union College in Alabama, Dillard University of New Orleans, Tougaloo, and Back Bay Mission, Mississippi. It was a new experience for our young people from Iowa. This was particularly true relative to direct communication with persons of another race. Most of the schools we visited were original church-related colleges established after the Civil War for Negro youth. While we were in Nashville, one of our group became ill and was taken to the Meharry Hospital, where he was served by black doctors and nurses without charge. He will likely not forget that experience. The person he was talking about is me. On our first trip, remember we stopped in, I think it was Terre Haute. We left Hinsdale, stopped for lunch at Terre Haute, Indiana, at a diner along the highway, and I remember after that, in the afternoon, I wasn't feeling so good on the bus, some indigestion or something, and I was asked to, Doug, why don't you go and lie down in the back of the bus where there was the seats in the back of the bus went clear across and there was room to lie down. I'm not sure that helped because I think I got some of that's where some of the fumes from the bus engine were coming in. When we got to the college, went to the hospital. It's the first time I've been in a hospital since being born. And I remember a black doctor there, poking and prodding my abdomen and for a while, and I think he thought I might have had appendicitis. I thought, oh, what a great thing to happen on the start of a trip. But I guess eventually I got better. I remember then they released me later after a while to go to a dorm room, and I seemed to be feeling better, and I survived whatever happened. I guess it went away. So that was my experience on the trip. I would say that just in conclusion, this has been a great experience, just being able to put this together. I think the highlight of the trip that we all agreed, as Jack said, was being at Koinonia Farm in Americus, Georgia, and we've been on the trip for a few days, so we kind of had an idea of the area and learning about the problems, the situation, and then in the evening, these youths coming in, some blacks and whites who were working at Koinonia, and standing, joining hands and singing "We Shall Overcome." The first time I'm sure I'd sung it out loud, and some other songs. This was not that group, but this would be reminiscent, I think, of what we all remember, standing in a large room and singing that. The leader of the Koinonia at the time, if any of you heard the name Clarence Jordan, who was a leader of the civil rights movement, and Koinonia was very much in the forefront of what was going on at that time. And Clarence Jordan lived a life, was very much dedicated, did a lot of work for racial equality, he had a cousin who later was Hamilton Jordan, who was chief of staff to when Jimmy Carter was president. I think, Paul, we don't, none of us really remember a lot of the presentations or details of our stops at the college. That would be one of the highlights. Visiting New Orleans was a highlight, and I think I think the trip just brought a realization of the difference from the sheltered lives that we led in Maquoketa, which was far both in distance and in our consciousness from the racial issues and issues taking place elsewhere. And I think the other thing is that all of us have expressed really surprised, almost flabbergasted, that none of our parents really expressed a lot of concern about us taking a trip, even after some of these violent events were taking place. That I think they were all for it and thought this would be a great trip and a great learning experience for us. So I'll ask if Jack and Helen have any impressions, and Connie, if you would like to say something.
I never keep my mouth shut. I have to also say that the word koinonia is the one that first comes to my mind about that trip. Now, looking at these, I think, good grief, all of these schools that were begun, it was 100 years after the Civil War, and that's how much they were still suffering.
Yes.
And knowing my parents, I can't believe they let me go at all. And to have the money to do it. I know they borrowed money for me to go to camp sometimes, so that they paid for that trip was wonderful. Now for a little joke. Helen called and wanted to know what I remembered, and I had taken a college trip in the South a few years later, and I remember, I get those memories mixed up with these. But what I do remember is going overnight to another church, getting ready for bed. You know what those girls were doing to their long hair? They were rolling it in fruit cans, and they were sleeping overnight on fruit cans, and it was like, huh? Never heard of such a thing. So, there's my memories.
I also remember when we were at Koinonia Farms, there were bullet holes in the walls around us. Those are the two things I remember from there. And also, I'd like to share,
Kind of what got me started on this was during COVID, I was looking through a box of old letters and cards and things that Mom had saved, and then I saved. And there was a letter written to me because I had my 18th birthday on this trip, the last day of the trip. And her letter was dated June 20th, 1963. If you are keeping your schedule, you stayed in New Orleans last night and are on your way north today. I hope you will not encounter any difficulty around Jackson, Mississippi. I'm certain if things do not look okay, you will bypass that locality. No, we did not. But we were later, so that was fine. So anyway, I wanted to share that.
Who wrote the letter?
Her mom?
Yeah.
Her mother wrote the letter,
Yeah.
and she doesn't know how she got it, because it was, I said, was it in your suitcase? And she said, no. So it must have been delivered at one of the stops along the way, and somehow or other, Helen got it.
Wow.
I guess I just wanted to come back up and thank Helen for all the work that she did, helping to put this, doing the slides, her and Rich. It was an eye-opener again to see exactly what we did go through. And
It gave me chills, and a few of these things. We were so close to what might have been.
and not really aware of a lot
It's
of
still
it.
not. I mean,
You know,
until
we saw the
recently.
pictures, we saw that.
Yeah.
Basically, after we got home, all the things that had happened. And Doug and I were talking, and Connie would be the same, that we also remembered when Kennedy was assassinated. I was sitting in study hall, and I couldn't remember who but Doug thought it was Mr. Dickinson, and I said, they came in and announced that the president had been shot and had died, and I was sitting at the table with 6 kids around the table, and we were talking about it, you know, in a state of shock about a horrible tragedy, and Mr. Dickinson put us on detention because they were not supposed to talk in study hall. And I never forgave him for that. I'm thinking, here we are, the president's dead, and you're going to tell us we have to stay a half hour after school because we were talking about it? But I do have to say that the trip was very eye-opening. Helen brought back a lot of memories that I had. I was like Connie, God, 64 years, how do you remember that? I can remember 57 years ago when I got married. I can't remember what happened all in our lives at 64 when you're 15 years old. A lot changes in your life between then and now. But I appreciate the opportunity to work with Doug and Helen, and I hope you enjoyed it, because we enjoyed it, and we were glad we didn't know everything while we were on the trip. And really, the students that we met and talked to and visited with were so warm and so friendly and just welcomed us with open arms. And that was a big part of it. And I love singing "You Will Overcome."
Any questions or? So, yes.
I looked up the book, Black Like Me, is listed as available on Amazon.
I think it is, and I might still have a copy of it if anybody is interested.
$8 is for you guys.
And then I have a question, and he referenced it just a little bit, but there was comments a couple times about talking with other kids of your same age. And I was curious as if you remember your recollections of those conversations, the attitude of the others that you spoke with, some of the conversations, the things you talked about. Do you recollect what any of those conversations were like with other kids of your peer age at that time?
As Jack said, they were very friendly, and they were very much interested in doing, working toward the equality of races.
And they knew we were connected to the United Church of Christ, and most of the places that we went to were affiliated with the United Church or Congregational Church, whichever. Yeah. And so I can't remember specifics. It was just young kids talking amongst each other about life, I guess.
But with it makes me say, I have to say, with a church and a Christian background, and how important that is.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what was being stressed there. We'd often meet with the dean of the college or an adult college official, but then we had social contact with some of the kids. Probably when we say our age, they were probably more college kids, college age. Maybe they were summer school or involved in a program while we were. The 3 of us were still in high school.
Did you have any restaurants or bathrooms that black people weren't allowed to go in?
That's one funny thing. I tried to search my mind to remember of like looking up and seeing separate bathrooms or drinking fountains, and frankly, I
remember coming down, the bus was coming down a hill into a city of some sort, and there were some colored only signs, whites only, and it was like they were on cardboard or barn board or something, very primitive and kind of primitively written. But that impressed me. I was just sitting in the right spot on the bus coming down the hill, and I thought, what's this?
I think one of the things I noticed too is that when we were on the bus traveling from place to place, we went by a lot of poverty. And a lot of the people had their refrigerators, if they had a refrigerator sitting on the front porch, they were just shacks that they were living in. And it just made your heart ache for them. Because we had so much at home, even a family of 6, we had everything that we needed. And to think they didn't have the necessities of life. One of the other things that we did, which we didn't talk about, when we were in New Orleans, we were going through the French quarters on the bus, and we can't remember if the bus just stopped or if it broke down, because we had an opportunity to walk around the French quarters while we were down there and go into Preservation Hall and see some of that, which we wouldn't have had if the bus didn't either break down or stop and allow us to do that. So it was fun.
I'm a little younger than you. I was 3 weeks old when you went on your trip. But anyway, and when I was in college, I remember I went to Central and I had to read Black Like Me. It's an excellent book. But there's also a movie of it, and it's available on streaming on YouTube, TV, Apple TV, Prime Video. Just Google where can I watch Black Like Me. And you can watch the movie too. It's an excellent book.
And I thought the movie was very, very good too. I really did when I saw it. Terry?
The thing that I have difficulty with is when I'm walking amongst wherever I'm located, whether it's a mall or downtown or a grocery store, and I look into the eyes of a black person, and so often I see them do this, or as you're walking along, they'll look away so they don't have, and I feel so sad for them because I feel that we have put them down, and I think we need to smile and you know, welcome them because they're one of us.
Absolutely.
Just a comment. I just want to make a comment. In 1999, which would be 36 years after your trip, I had the privilege to lead a group of kids from the same church, the UCC, into the South. And the bulk of our trip was spent in Birmingham. And what got me right now was your mention of that was the 13th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, which we visited with the kids that many years later. And that was still a major, that was one of the major happenings. 1963 really was the pivotal year in all of the South.
Yeah, I think if you look at the history, that was the pivotal year for that. The civil rights legislation that President Kennedy was proposing didn't come about. Actually, it was started, but then the following year, Kennedy was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson became president, and then the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act came about. But it really had its start in '63.
Catherine?
Yeah, I just, excuse me, wanted to mention that I worked for John Deere, and I was transferred from Moline to Georgia in 1973, 10 years later. And when I was out in dealerships, you know, all over the rural South, there were always, you know, black only in the dealerships, even, you know, black only bathrooms and stuff like that. And we at John Deere hired all kinds of people. And I remember distinctly going in a restaurant in South Georgia with me and 2 or 3 other people and a black guy. And boy, did we get looked at. You know, we real fully expected to get kicked out, but we didn't. But just the fact that we were eating with this black person was unreal. I mean, it was very eye-opening, like you said, for a kid from Iowa to see how those poor people were. There were people working in the dealership that couldn't read, you know. They had no education. But boy, they could fine-tune a diesel engine.
Thank God the times have changed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Roberta.
There's another film that you could watch on streaming. I don't think it's Netflix. I forgot how I got to watch it, but it's called Rustin, and it's about the whole planning of the March on Washington, which you mentioned was like in August, right after you were there. And that was really interesting to think of how he organized that whole thing.
There's another movie about a black pianist that traveled and all of the things that, even though he was highly acclaimed as a performer, he couldn't perform some places. They wouldn't allow him in when they, apparently they didn't know he was black until he got there.
The Green Book? The Green Book.
Yeah, yeah. That was a wonderful movie.
Thank you for coming.